Welcome to Female Fluence. We are a place of women empowering women. This is a safe environment where females are not judged nor afraid to flourish. My goal is to help you live an energized life of balance, whether as a mom, a wife, or in your profession. It is time to have self-worth and self-compassion. Live in the present moment and surround yourself with only healthy connections. So join me, Promash Shua, a woman empowerment life coach, an educator, and a mother of three, to help take you on a journey of true identity and inspiration. Dealing with a narcissistic spouse can take a toll on your mental well-being. Such a partner often employs a range of manipulative, charismatic, and exploitative behaviors to prioritize their own needs. As a spouse, you may find yourself at the receiving end of manipulation and abuse, while your narcissistic partner presents a charming facade in social settings. Living with someone who has a narcissistic personality disorder can lead to various forms of manipulation, diminished self-esteem, and a sense of isolation. Ironically, narcissistic individuals are often drawn to strong, confident, and self-assured partners. It's crucial to understand that their grandiosity and confidence are essentially a cover for their deep-seated insecurity. Today, we're joined by Stephany Ann, a former attorney and a recipient of the Governor's Award for Advocacy and Supporting Survivors of Domestic Violence. Stephany is not only a survivor herself, but also a passionate advocate against domestic abuse. She is a devoted mother, lawyer, and an EFT practitioner. In this episode, we will delve into the narcissistic experiences that plagued her two marriages and explore the definition of domestic abuse and learn about her journey toward healing. Stephany will also share with us the profound emotional pain, isolation, and self-doubt that came with everything she experienced. Thank you, Stephany. I'm so privileged to have you on my show today. And I just want to welcome you to Female Fluence. And before we start, I would just want our listeners to know that they need to be aware that this episode does contain mention of domestic violence and suicide. So please consider the topic if it's going to be a trigger for you before you start listening. Okay, welcome, Stephany.
Thank you so much for having me.
So before we start, we want to get to know you a little bit better. Can you tell us about yourself before you got married, like your upbringing, your childhood, your family?
Yeah, one of the myths also about being in domestic violence or a toxic relationship is that you come from chaos. I did not come from chaos. My parents are still married. They modeled healthy marriage. They modeled healthy family. In fact, I had so many friends growing up who spent so much time at our house because my parents did model healthy behaviors and a healthy family. So growing up, I had all that. And I was in sports, I was active, I read, I was active in the community. I went to college. I did everything right.
Right.
When you think of I went to college, I went to law school, I got to spend 5 years traveling around the world.
Wow.
Just doing really amazing things as a young adult. And so when I first met my first husband, I didn't know what narcissism was. I did know about domestic violence because when I was in college, I started working at the prosecutor's office, learning how to be an advocate, learning about the legal system, because I knew I wanted to go to law school. And so I knew about the cycle of abuse, but I did not know at the time that I was in an abusive relationship, which shows you how difficult it is. With me, with my background in law and domestic violence, I did not know I was in an abusive relationship.
Yeah. It's very
And I,
ironic how that works, right?
and I think that that's real important because so many people, where I say we find ourselves in these relationships, like we don't usually go seeking them out, although sometimes with repeated patterns and stuff in our life, we do call them in sometimes.
Right.
But my first husband, he was the covert narcissist, and in the beginning, it was great. We both went to different universities, and so he was actually in university in California, and I was in university in Oregon. But we would meet. So the first couple of years was long distance, and then he moved up to Oregon. He also came from a very healthy, stable family as well. His parents are still married today. They've been married for over 50 years.
That's
And
interesting.
his dad's a psychiatrist. Um, and so and honestly, I'm still very close to his family. His family, I consider his parents my second parents. Like I'm still
Were they
very, very close
supportive
to them.
throughout the whole situation with you?
They were, they
Okay.
were. And it was actually my ex-husband who disowned his parents because they continued to love
Wow.
me and support me. And so he disowned them. He told them they had to choose between me or him, or he would disown them. And his parents said, "We love you. We love Stephany. We want you involved in our life, but we're not going to get rid of Stephany because you don't like her anymore," which is also very atypical and
It
unusual.
is. It's unusual, but they probably, I mean, they would probably, I'm sure they witnessed some of the things that was happening and they wanted him to change, and they want to be
Absolutely.
involved in their grandkids. So it's like a cycle of this.
Absolutely. And, like I said, his parents have always been like second parents to me. I was married to their son for 14 years and dated him for several years. And so, they're half my life
Right.
has been with them.
Yeah.
And so, I didn't really start to notice anything unusual in our marriage until I went to law school. So we moved to Michigan. I went to law school and he was working on his doctorate as well. And because all my attention now was focused on law school
It wasn't on
and
him.
it wasn't on him.
Yeah.
And that's when everything changed.
Right.
And that's when I started noticing him staying up all night, chatting with women. And so for him, he was not violent, but he was a serial cheater. Like he was constantly looking for other women to validate him. And so if you look at what narcissism is, remember it's back from that old Greek mythology of Narcissus, the man who fell in love with his reflection.
Right.
And so with narcissism, some of the traits are this grandiose sense of self-importance, a preoccupation with fantasies of unlimited power, success, wealth, beauty, whatever it may be. They have this belief that they are above everyone else and they are just so uniquely special that we just need to worship the ground they
Right.
walk on.
It's kind of like a toddler, but
It is.
right, like
It is.
because you can make excuses when they're like kids are like, oh, she's 2 years old. I'm going to give in. She needs more attention. But then as an adult, if that
Yes.
continues,
Oh my
that
gosh.
doesn't work
No,
out.
it totally is like that. And that's really interesting that you mention it because I just dropped my kids off at school and we were talking. And I always tell my kids, I'm like, they try to boss everyone around. I'm like, you are not the boss. You are a leader in our family. I am the boss. And
Yeah.
then my youngest one, he goes, well, Baron, who's my 2-year-old, he's like, well, Baron's a little king. I'm like, no, Baron is not a little king. But yes, no, that's exactly what it is. Like this need for excessive
Attention.
admiration,
Yep.
this sense of entitlement that goes beyond anything you've ever seen. But then they use all this to exploit other people, to manipulate, to
Mhm.
get what they want. They lack empathy, and they are envious of others, but it's because they think other people are envious of them.
Them.
And they're just so arrogant. And so, I always tell people, because I'm like, we all have some narcissistic traits.
Right.
And it's good. We should be confident. We should know who we are. We should
Because you
stand
need
in
a
our
little bit
power.
of that in order to be a little, confident, but you need to manage it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And
Yeah.
and we're not out to deceive people and to manipulate and take advantage of them. And that's one of the big differences, is that empathy.
Right.
Like, we have empathy and understanding. And so
Compassion, right? And
the
because they
compassion
lack
and
compassion, right?
yeah. And so, with my first husband, he once I became focused on something else that wasn't him, he still needed that supply. He needed that fuel to feed
So,
his
Stephany, let me
image.
ask you this. When he was cheating, was it more like emotional or he was like a sex addict? Was he having actual relationships sexually or it was more like online on the phone? Like
You
what was he
know,
craving so much?
um, I I don't know the full extent of everything that he did. So I don't know if it ever became physical. I do know that he was seeking validation from any woman.
Mhm.
It did not matter if she was beautiful. It did not matter, what she looked like, because, sometimes we think, oh, I mean, they're just after all these beautiful women. No, it was like, oh, why? It was any woman that would give him attention.
Attention.
And so I do know, based on chats that I did see online, there were plans to meet up on several occasions, but I don't know if it ever actually happened. He says it never did, but then again, who
How do we
knows?
know?
They're very good manipulators and
Right.
charmers and liars. So I never fully knew. And there were times when I traveled for work. I worked in Dubai a couple times, over the years. I would be
When you were
gone for,
married
a month.
with
Uh-huh.
him? Oh, so you had to leave it.
Yeah.
Oh
Yeah.
gosh.
So, I would be gone for like a month. But see, I still had access to all his social media and his accounts. So I knew he was still meeting up with women. And so there were some questionable things that happened. But here's the thing. I still didn't recognize this as abuse. And here I am, trained in domestic violence.
So what kind of
But
an attorney were you?
so I did domestic violence work. I also did business. So I was a online attorney for female content creators.
But it was a
But
lot. I mean, a lot of your main stuff was advocacy for domestic violence, which like
yeah,
you said earlier, it's really ironic to me because that this is how it usually is. Like if you have a therapist who can give great advice to their clients, but then like their own marriage might be falling apart. You have a physician that might be really unhealthy and obese, but they're giving,
yes.
advice to their patients. This is what happens a lot of the times because this was your field and you were an advocate and you were helping other women and you kind of knew what the signs were, but when the signs for yourself were in front of you, you either, I don't know if you chose not to see it or you really didn't because you were in love or you were blindsided.
Well, I think it was, oh, I think for myself and other people I have talked to, it's we separate cheating and abuse. And so I didn't see cheating as domestic violence. I see it now because it's the psychological, it's the emotional, and and more of the emotional psychological is becoming more known.
Right.
But back then, 20 plus years ago, it was okay, domestic violence is the physical. Did you physically get hurt? No. but it wasn't really emphasized and stressed about the emotional and the psychological abuse. And
Right.
so back
And I
then
feel like a
it
lot of people
was,
don't refer to it as abuse, right? Like we were
yeah,
talking earlier. It's like, oh, if I'm not actually physically getting hit, then I'm not being abused. But emotional and psychological and verbal abuse can be 10 times more damaging, you know?
absolutely. But if you were to make a phone call to the police right now, say, hey, I want to report domestic violence. My partner is calling me names and verbally abusing me and psychologically manipulating me and
Hmm.
gaslighting, they would be like, go find a therapist.
I'd be like,
You
bye.
know, they're not, I mean, they're not going to come and arrest
No.
him, which they should, because that is abuse and he's the primary abuser. And I say men just because it's my situation, although I also recognize that
Of course, it can
women
happen
as
either
well.
way, right? So when you were in the marriage, when did it start changing? Like when did you see the true side? Was it like 4 years into the marriage, or was it right after the honeymoon? Or
It was, so we got married in 2005 and I started law school in 2007.
okay,
So yeah, it was about 2 years when
okay,
I started noticing that. And so I would bring it up to him all the time. Like, hey, you need to stop doing this. This is how it's making me feel. Why are you doing this? But he would never really talk about it. And then he would say he would stop, but he never would. And so and again, I didn't recognize this as abuse. I just recognized it as he's a cheater. And so over the years, my trust in him just diminished and diminished and diminished as he continued to seek outside validation.
now
Uh,
when you know he was cheating on you, did you want like the details? Would you kind of go and interrogate him, or like check on his phone, check whatever, or follow him? Or would you kind of just say, I'm going to pretend it's not happening, kind of, just ignoring the whole situation, avoiding it, and just saying, okay, like I love him. Maybe this is kind of just pretending that this was not your reality. Which path were you doing?
no, in the beginning, it was very much like in me in his face. I told all his friends. I told our friends and family. So people knew what was going on. Um, and then, but the thing is that he never stopped. And at,
Did he ever get
at
help, or did he ever offer to get help?
nope, nope. And he, I tried to bring up counseling and therapy, all of this stuff. And here we both came from these really strong marriages where you work things out. He did at one point when I was in law school, he said he was done and we should get a divorce. And for some reason, I've always gone back to this, like, why didn't I just agree? He actually gave me an ultimatum: give up my career and start having babies, or he was going to leave. And I don't know. I think it was, just the stuck kind of in that trauma bond. Um, and so I didn't
Can you
want to
actually
lose him.
explain about what the trauma bond cycle is for our listeners?
Yeah, so a trauma bond is in the trauma bond cycle is very similar to the domestic violence cycle. So what happens is in the beginning of a relationship, you have this honeymoon period that is just bliss. It's everything that you ever imagined. And narcissists know how to create
Charming.
the most perfect honeymoon. And after the honeymoon, then you have the devaluation stage. And this is where they take their mask off a little bit.
Mhm.
This is where the criticisms come in. This is where they start manipulating. This is where you start to see the gaslighting. And I'll explain that in just a little bit too. It's where they start looking outside for other sources of supply, what we say. So, with my husband, looking for external validation from other women, any women, who would just give him some praise and attention. And so then what happens is then they apologize. It might be an actual apology, or it might just be, um, and it's not an apology like I'm sorry. It's, oh, maybe I took it too far. Um, and so then they start with love bombing you back. And so you get trapped in this cycle because there's enough intermittent reinforcement of um, I love you. Oh, that will never happen again.
Yeah.
I'm
And
so
Stephany, part of
sorry.
the love bombing, is there a point to, because I mean I guess maybe I've seen it in the movies or whatnot, but where they actually reverse it, where they start sobbing. So then you feel pity and you
Oh,
feel so
oh,
sorry. So you don't have the heart to pick up your bag and leave, right? So that's like another kind of reverse
exactly.
psychology. Yeah.
Oh man. And when we get to my second husband, he is definitely a victim and he's a crier. He can cry on
That
command.
was
Like I've
his way
never,
of manipulating you, right? Was with the tears,
yes,
right?
yes.
You,
Oh
gosh,
man.
Stephany, you've experienced it all. Oh my gosh.
Well, this is why I share my story too. If I can prevent even one person from making some of the mistakes I
Yes,
made, then it is worth it because
that's
our struggle is not our own. And so, another way I like to explain the trauma bond, because this also really helps people, it's like a drug addiction. And I used to actually say that to my ex-husband, like, God, I feel like I'm so addicted to you. And I've never said that to anyone else. And so if you think of the first time you use a drug and and you reach this certain high,
hi.
this dopamine high, and every time after, you keep searching for that same high, although you never quite make it up there. And that's what keeps people addicted because they're
Hmm.
constantly trying to reach that first level
The same high.
of high. And so similarly in a narcissistic relationship with the trauma bond, it's that they know how to love you, that they know how to be kind to you, that they know how to treat you well because they did that in the beginning. And so you stay
Because
because
you want that, right?
you
You're
want that.
searching for that again.
You're waiting for that. And so when the devaluation hits, you're like, okay, well, this sucks. This is tragic for the moment, but you're like, but I know that he knows how to love. And so that's what keeps you stuck in this addictive cycle. And it's very, very hard to break that, just like it is with a drug addiction. This
Right.
is very hard. And so people will ask, well, Stephany, why didn't you leave? If he spent 10 years cheating on you, why didn't you go? And that was a question I have struggled with for a very long time that I had to work
Because
through.
Stephany, when did you have children with him, right?
We do.
So
Mm-hmm.
how when you said you were married for 2 years, you started law school, things were not doing that well, they were going up and down, but then you chose to stay and you guys decided to have a family, right?
Yeah. Yep. And so he still continued his pattern. And I really just focused on being a good mom. And even that was hard because some of his criticisms were, why do you have to be the best mom? Why do you have to be better than all the other moms? Why do you have to make
Would
all
he
your
get
food from scratch?
jealous if you gave attention to the
Yes.
children?
Oh
And then
yes.
was he manipulative towards the kids? Like, was there any kind of
I don't
abuse towards the
no,
children or no?
no, I don't think so.
Okay.
Um, but he still continued to look out for us. So we ended up moving back home to be near family. We both have two sets of our grandparents were back. We moved back to Oregon. Um, and I just focused on my kids, and not very many people knew that he was still um, searching, looking for women, all this stuff. And it just got to the point where I constantly felt like we were walking in eggshells in the house. It was um, everything to appease him. And you start to internalize a lot of this stuff. Like, okay, there must be something wrong with me.
Of
Maybe I need help.
course.
And
Of
and he would
course.
and he would tell me, I think you're crazy, you're unhappy, you're all of this stuff. And it's like, no, actually, I mean, I am unhappy because I'm unhappy with your behavior and what it's doing to our life. But when he left for another woman, and she was actually a married woman as well. Actually, we were all in the same church group,
Oh
and he
gosh.
would get so mad at me because I wouldn't go to church. I'm like, I'm not going to church. Why am I going to church and pretending to live this life when you are a horrible person and not living what you're preaching.
Right, of
And
course.
so I refused to go. And so he would go by himself, and he met this woman and they became friends, and he wanted me to be friends with her. And he always wanted all my girlfriend's phone numbers and stuff. I'm like, that's so inappropriate.
Of course.
Um, and so yeah, we were in this like a Bible study home group, and I told him so many times, like, what are you doing leading this home group?
That's
And like,
crazy.
it was. And I'm just like,
Definitely not listening to
good
whatever, is
God.
being preached, right?
Yeah. And I'm just like, good Lord. And he could not get over the fact that I just could not be
So
involved
he
in this.
left.
But, I
He
went.
finally left you. So then how long after that did
Yes.
you meet your second husband?
So with my second husband, I thought I had healed. I had done a lot of hard work on myself. And it was about 2 years, I'm like, okay, 2 years,
I'm
that's
ready. Right.
that's good. I'm ready. I'm ready to start dating. And so, I'm a big manifester. So I wrote out the list of what I wanted. Um, and this time I was like, okay, I'm going for a look. So I did tall, dark, handsome. We all want that. And divorced dad, only with boys, because I
Okay.
have boys and my boys were a little wild. And I'm like, I was very specific. My first husband was in the medical profession. I'm like, okay, medical, they're all cheaters. So I labeled, and I'm like, I'm going businessman over here. Let's try the business side. So I made my list and I put it out there. And a week later, I met a man who fit
All of
everything
it.
on that everything on that list. 6'3", beautiful, three boys. His supposedly ex-wife cheated on him too, which I later found out none of this is true.
Oh,
Nothing he told me was true. And so I also thought I was doing it right. I'm like, let's just get to know each other online. He lived 3.5 hours away. Um, I'm like, let's just really get to know each other before we meet, because I also didn't want the relationship to be all physical.
of course.
And so, again, I'm thinking I'm doing everything right. Well, how are you supposed to know or see red flags or talk to their friends or see their family? Like, you don't. And so here I am.
Yeah.
I'm like, I manifested him. So when he starts telling me, oh, we're soulmates, oh, we're meant to be together, that resonates with me. I mean, he checked everything off the list.
Right.
God gave him to me. And so we spent a couple months talking and getting to know each other. And so when we did meet, I was already in love with him. And that's how fast they make things go. Like, that's a red flag. To me, I didn't think it was a red flag because I manifested him. And of
Right.
course, it's going to go
You
fast,
just thought you were being lucky this time around. God has
Yes,
given you the right man. Correct.
yes, yes. And so uh, everything moved very quickly. We met and got married within the same year. And so I also didn't think anything of it. He had been married twice, so we didn't want a big wedding. We both had very big weddings our first time around. So we just kind of eloped to the courthouse and did it, and madly in love. And I did not see any of the red flags, because a lot of times as well, they know how they're not going to show their true selves
Oh,
until they have you hooked. And one of the ways they get you hooked is rushing into a very serious connected relationship and marrying you or having a child with you,
right.
something.
Something.
And so in hindsight, I look back and I'm like, okay, he mirrored me. I fell in love with me and everything that he loved about me. I love that you're a strong, independent woman. I love that all your girlfriends are strong, independent, like uh, feminist women who speak their mind and their truth and have their opinions. And I love that you do too, Stephany. I love that about you. I love that you're an attorney. You're a great mom. You're all these things. When the devaluation came, it was, oh, I hate attorneys. Attorneys are like the most corrupt people in the world. They're only just money. They're all these things. And it's like, okay, so you do know you're hurting my feelings when you are making fun of and criticizing my profession, what I worked extremely hard to become. And he didn't care. It was like he just turned into this different person. He hated all my girlfriends. Oh, I don't want her coming over here. Why are you talking to her? Oh, it's her again. Why?
Probably he wanted to isolate you, right? Because if he
Oh,
brainwashed you
absolutely.
enough, where you started, if someone's constantly telling you, oh, I hate that friend of yours, she did this behind your back, you start actually believing it. And then before you know it, you have no girlfriends and he has you all to himself.
Yeah. And that's eventually what happened. And so, and then his drinking, he was a heavy alcoholic.
Wow.
I didn't know this because he drank vodka and he hid all the vodka bottles. And
Oh
so
my
I
gosh.
had no idea. And at the time when I divorced my first husband, I live in wine country in Southern Oregon. And so vineyards everywhere. And so I needed a fun job just to have no kids, but also just connect and have fun. So I started working one day a week, Saturdays at a vineyard.
Fun.
And so it was very fun, meeting tons of very cool people and, learning about the wine. So I'm around people who drink it all the time. And I'm not seeing it as a big deal. And so when he would come to the vineyard and drink, just like with everyone else, it's just wine. I did not know that he would stash gallons of vodka in his car.
Oh my
I
goodness.
only learned about that later because, vodka is almost odorless as well. And so I didn't know. And so, drinking that it wasn't a red flag if you don't see that.
Right.
And so we got married in December 2019, and then the world shut down. So I had only been married to him for like 2.5 months.
Oh my goodness.
And
And
COVID
now
hits, right?
you're in the house together
Yeah.
the
The
whole
mask
time.
has come off. He has his 3 kids for 2 weeks. So we had this like 2 week on, 2 week off schedule with his 3 kids. And I had my 2 boys. And he just kind of turned into this whole different person. And it
You're
was
trapped in
so
the house. Oh, my heart goes out to you. That because that was a difficult time for everyone, even people with normal marriages. So I can't even
oh yeah,
imagine being in that kind of environment.
it was it was very it was so hard because I couldn't tell what was like 2020 influence. Was 2020 influencing like his behavior? Like
Right.
was he
Was he
just
just stressed because of
struggling? And
COVID? He was
yeah,
struggling, or was
exactly,
it
exactly.
completely something else?
Yeah, and so I did not know. It was so confusing. And then you throw in the gaslighting in there. And so gaslighting is when they try to change your perception or your reality of events. So for instance, I could say, hey, last night when we got into this argument, you were arguing and you were name calling me, like you were calling me names, and he would say, I didn't do that. No, you're making that up. No, that never happened. and maybe we were both drinking a little bit. So it was like, okay,
So you start
did that really
second
happen?
guessing and doubting
You
yourself.
do. You do. And that's what they do. And so I started to keep a journal because I was just so confused. I'm
To
like,
assure
and
yourself this really happened last night.
yes, exactly. And then I had a whole wine cellar as well, and he drank hit my whole cellar. And I actually stopped drinking in 2020 because I couldn't figure out what was going on. And I'm like, I need to be sober because I can't tell what is truth and what is not.
Right,
And
right.
so
That
I
was
stopped
smart.
drinking.
Yeah.
I kept a journal, and I would seriously in my journal, I'd be like, I don't know if it's like Mr. Hyde, Dr. Jekyll, what it was just so confusing. And so one night he but his drinking became heavier and heavier and heavier. And I just started taking the kids out of the house and we'd be gone all day. I'm like, I can't be around this. I don't want to be around it. And one of the things too with narcissists, they will use any insecurity of yours against you.
Against you.
And so in the beginning, when they're forming that trauma bond with you, they get you to open up. Like he was the easiest person I could talk to. And plus he was very relatable because he told me his ex-wife was cheating on him. All his girlfriends had cheated on him. I mean, if I could go back in time, this is the red flag. Listen to how they talk about other women in their life.
Mm-hmm.
He was the victim with all these abusive women. And I know now I'm part of that abusive women story that he's has since moved on.
Right.
Um, and
And he
so,
told you everything you needed to hear. You know how you were
oh
saying he
yeah,
was like kind of like a
absolutely.
reflection of yourself. You needed to hear someone who's experienced your pain, your trauma with a cheating spouse, and he gave that
Yes.
to you so that you made an immediate connection.
Yeah. And an immediate bond
Mm-hmm.
there. He knows what it's like. His ex-wife cheated on him for years. No, I actually went and talked to her. She left him because he was abusive. Um, and so, you know, one night, my son, who was, I think he was 9 at the time, he got his finger shut in the door jam, and it was so bad. His finger was like dangling. I had to take him to the ER, and he got 10 stitches.
Ouch. Yeah.
So when I came back, Chase was very drunk. He was very mean, just horrible. So I got out my phone and I'm like, well, I'm going to record him because then he never believes me. And so I did, and he turned into this
Wait,
demon.
you did it. He knew you were doing it because
Yeah, yeah,
that can
yeah.
aggravate a whole nother behavior.
Uh-huh,
Right?
uh-huh.
Yeah.
And he attacked me. And he, in his gaslighting ways, he has always said, no, I was just trying to get the phone from you. Oh, it did not feel like he was just trying to get the phone from me. So I ended up taking my children and my dog, and we left that night, but my phone had called 911. And so I talked to the police, and I actually ended up filing a restraining order against him to get him out of the house. And I went no contact with him for 2 months. And it was during this time I finally felt like all the oppression was out of my house. But again, remember it's 2020, so it's so confusing because I did not know, was he really like this? Because I had spent a year with him where he was incredible. And the only difference was 2020 and the craziness of the world.
Right.
And so it was during this time that I found out about EFT because I just felt like I needed something. And one of my friends had made a post about EFT, which is emotional freedom techniques. It's tapping. For anyone who doesn't know, it's you tap on the meridian points of your body. It's kind of like a tapping acupuncture where you the first round is you really sit with these big emotions, and then you release them, and then you tap into the person you are becoming. And so I thought I was signing up to work with an EFT practitioner to help me work through and process this past year. But I actually signed up to become a practitioner. So,
Well, that's
God,
great.
sometimes God, the universe, they knows what we need.
Yeah, what you
And
needed.
so I spent hours and hours and hours and weeks and months and years learning about tapping and really healing myself and working through a lot of these traumas from both my marriages. And so I was still conflicted. I had filed for divorce. But then his mother kept reaching out to me. Stephany, he's changed. Stephany, he stopped drinking. He loves you. He's changed. He misses you. All this stuff. And again, so conflicting.
Yeah. But somehow you
And
got lured back. Is that what
I
happened?
did. Yep.
Yeah.
So, and this is what happens. And this is why also you hear, even in the cycle of domestic violence, it takes a person leaving multiple times before you actually finally leave for good. And so,
So let me ask you this. Do you feel that your pattern of feeling unworthy is a reason that you attracted the same type of person in your life twice?
I think that yes, there is the unworthy part of it. We tend to call people into our life to reflect that back to us.
Mm-hmm.
And so I do believe that. I also believe that unless you learn all the lessons and heal completely, you will continue to repeat those patterns. And so when I say that I manifested my second husband, I did. And I also got all the unlearned lessons. And until we learn those lessons, we will keep attracting the same people over and over again.
Over and over.
And so for me, what happened was I finally had really left. So I got back together with Jace. Things were good for a couple months, and then
And did
it
you
was like
guys
the
have
honeymoon
a child
again.
together, right?
We do. We have our baby together.
So then that's a total of 5 boys?
No, it was a total of 6 boys.
6?
Under 14. And
you are a super mom. That's crazy.
I was a super mom, exhausted super mom. And to top that off, his ex-wife died of COVID in 2021.
Oh, wow.
And so, I was the only mother figure
for those
to
boys,
those 3 boys as well. And that also made it much more difficult to leave. Because when I made the choice to leave, I had to leave those children behind as well. And I was the only mother in their life. And it was excruciating, but I had to protect myself and my children. And
so how did you start? Like, what was the final trigger that said you see your life through a different lens? Did something happen where you just woke up one morning and you said, that's it, I'm out of here? What happened? Like, how did you start that whole healing process?
So I left Jace. We had been separated. So we moved to Florida after his ex-wife died. And we were like, let's just have a whole fresh start for everyone. My first husband agreed that we could move. But the night before we were to leave, he took it all back, filed all these motions with the court, stopped me from going. So me and our baby and my other 2 biological children, we stayed behind in Oregon while the other ones moved. So we were separated for about 8 months.
Okay.
And my first husband's parents, I ended up living with them for those 8 months, which just
that's crazy.
which just like infuriated.
I'm sure.
And I'm like, well, if you don't like it, you signed the paper saying we could move, and then you took it all back. So you don't want me living with your parents, then let me go. because we already moved. Um, and so during those 8 months, I just continued to work on myself more, using the EFT
Hmm.
and just really trying to dive deeper into my healing. And so when Josh, my first ex-husband, when he finally re-agreed again 8 months later to let us go, we moved to Florida, and I was only in Florida for about 3 months. And I think because of the grace of God and all the healing that I had continued to do in my life, I just no longer could be manipulated. I saw right through him. And one of the things that narcissists love to do is provoke because they want a reaction. And if they get a reaction, it means that they are in control of you. They're in control of your emotions. They're in
Hmm.
control of your reactions. And so that is something that he loved to do. And then he played it off as sarcasm, which they love. They live in sarcasm
Yep.
because that's all they have. And so he would continue his tactics, and I would just walk out. Or, one of his big things was, they call it triangulation, where he knew that I had been cheated on for 14 years. And so he knew that he could say anything about any other women wanting him. And he knew it would get a reaction because in the past it did. But I really worked through a lot of that
Hmm.
during those 8 months that we were gone.
To be
And
non-reactive, right?
yeah, yeah. And so, he would be like, oh, I just went to the store and gosh, I got like 3 phone numbers. And I'd be like, yeah, well, you're a good looking guy. I could see why.
Good
And
for
then walk
you.
off.
Right.
And he could not handle
Tolerate
it
that. Yeah.
because, yeah. And so again, his mask was coming off, because if they cannot control you emotionally, if they cannot control you psychologically, they will resort to violence to
Hmm.
control you. And so he could not control me anymore. And when I would sit down and say, hey, you need to help me with these things, all the tears would come out. He would turn everything around. It
Right.
was
He was the
always
one who
about
cried.
him.
Right. Right.
Yep. He was the crier. So I would touch back on him. So he was very much the victim here. And so I just started being firmer in my boundaries. He would drink and then try to engage in a conversation with me. And I'm like, no, I will have this conversation with you in the morning when you are sober,
Hmm.
but I'm not doing it tonight. And I would just shut it off. And he would just storm off and, slam doors and mumble under his breath. Well, he went into a narcissistic rage, and I had never seen this before. It was terrifying. It is
So is
like,
this when you told him that you're officially leaving?
yeah,
When he
hmm,
completely lost it?
yeah.
Okay.
And he slipped out. And I know I did not go about this the right way, because, but you're just so,
You're done.
everything's just so
Hmm.
emotional, and you're done. And he flipped out. And for 3 weeks, he went on the biggest toddler temper tantrum. But think of a almost 6'4" grown man having this big temper tantrum,
Wow.
slamming doors, stomping around, punching walls. I call it the narcissistic rage, is where they turn into the Incredible Hulk. And I've actually talked to other women who've seen the Hulk. They've called it the Hulk as well. Um, Terrifying, because they're so unpredictable. You don't know what's going to happen. And here, my ex-husband, he has a bunch of knives, he has a bunch of guns.
Oh gosh.
He's the state champion for trap shooting in several states. He is an excellent marksman. We have a ton of guns in our house. I've never been shot. I think I've shot one gun in my life. And you
That's
know
very
um,
scary.
it's very scary because I didn't know what he was capable of doing. And I had never seen this. My first husband wasn't violent. Um, so he became very, very violent, yelling, screaming, throwing things, breaking things. Um, and again, I grew up in a peaceful, calm house too. So it's like this is just so unfamiliar
Hmm.
to me. So I actually called his grandma because his grandma is the only person that he really trusts. And I told her everything that was happening. And both of us, I'm like, I'm concerned for the boys. And then I told a friend, I'm like, if something happens and I need a safe place, can you be a safe person for me? And she said yes. And so I'm trying to formulate this plan. How do I leave with 6 children and a dog? And where do I go? I've only been in Florida
My
for two
goodness.
months.
I cannot
I
even
don't.
envision this. This is so scary.
It was terrifying, and I didn't know what to do or where to go or anything. I mean, I just moved here. Talk about like isolation. And if we were back in Oregon with my friends and family, I mean,
Yeah.
heck, my brother-in-law is the police sergeant, like,
Yeah.
um, and so he just became worse and worse and more provoking and tormenting. He would keep me up all night, like shining his phone in my face, pretending to record me or recording me. I don't know. Just bizarre behavior. I would lay in bed and he would like kick me out of the bed, get the fuck out of the bed, and pushing and kicking, like all of this stuff. One night I couldn't take it anymore. So I rolled over and I punched him and I said, leave me the fuck alone. I'm leaving in the morning and I'm taking the kids. And he got up really fast and he said, no, you're going to jail tonight, bitch, because you punched me. And then he went and called 911. I went outside and I went to jail that night.
Talk about
And
twisting everything around.
yeah, and so I'm sitting outside after, I punched him and he said I was going to jail. And then he beat me up. I mean, I was covered in bruises. He destroyed my phone. He prevented me from leaving. He blocked all the doors in our bedroom. We had, a door going out to the patio, and we had another door, prevented me from going. And I go outside, and, when I get arrested, it was, first of all, they interviewed me outside in the dark. They couldn't see any of the bruises. I didn't know I was covered in bruises. I didn't know, it was just, everything was just a
And
blur.
bruises take a while. It's not going to be immediate. You know what I mean? If you just gotten hit,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah. And so I said, why am I getting arrested? And they said, well, he's covered in blood and his story makes better sense than your story. Well, he wasn't bleeding when I left him and went outside. And I had heard, my niece told me that she was talking to his older son. And one time when I left him for a night, he told his older son to come and punch him a whole bunch of times because he thought I was going to call the cops. And so I know he hit himself. I know he cut
This is
himself.
like a movie,
Yeah,
right?
an
This is
insane one. Lifetime
right.
movie.
A Lifetime movie. That's exactly what I was going to say.
Yeah. No, it was the most and and I didn't have a phone. And so when I went to jail, I didn't have a single phone number and no one to call. I'm in Florida. I know one person because I just moved there. And I shouldn't have even been in jail. When the jail nurse saw me, she's like, "Oh my God, why are you here? You're covered in bruises." Because she was the first person to turn the lights on and actually look at my body
Mhm.
and stuff. And so, I knew though that the truth would come out. It always does. And
Of course.
unfortunately, when I was in jail too, I met a lot of other, almost all the women that were there was domestic violence related, and they were arrested as the primary aggressor, and they were not the primary aggressor.
They were trying to
And
defend
this,
themselves. Yeah.
exactly, and this is what is so wrong
It's
about
so
our justice
bizarre.
system
Yeah.
right now. And because once all the states went to someone needs to be arrested, like a mandatory arrest, the the cops are supposed to do a thorough investigation to find out who the primary aggressor was. I'm 5'9", I'm tall. I was probably 130 pounds. I was a twig. And he's almost 6'4", 270 maybe. You think I beat the shit out of him? You think he's afraid of me? Because it's all about power and control. No, he's not afraid of me. And he wasn't bleeding after I punched him. Um, and then she was like, well, he has scrapes all over his hands and bruises and stuff. I'm like, yeah, he's been throwing a fit for 3 weeks, punching walls, slamming doors, doing all kind of, he had this all set up. And in hindsight, I could see that this was the discard. It was the discard to make him look like the victim once again.
Yep.
And he can continue on to find the next sympathetic woman who is going to coddle him and care for him as the poor victim. All these women in your life are doing this.
So,
and
Stephany, with everything, I mean, that you have experienced, I mean, all the violence, and finally you left him, what steps, now that you know a lot better and you experienced it and you're an advocate for this, what are the steps that one should take to leave an abusive relationship? Because it can get violent, as you have seen. So if what advice you have for our listeners, someone who's listening out there right now who is terrified to leave an abusive relationship, what should they do?
Well, the first thing is, do not tell them you are leaving. The next thing is, get all your finances and all your legal documents in line. If you do not have a separate bank account, open up your own bank account. If you do not have a way of putting money in that account, because there are a lot of abusers who will, even if you go grocery shopping, they will meticulously scrutinize that receipt. I've told women who are in these situations, buy extra things and then return them. Any way to get some money and save it and put it aside in a bank account that only you know about. Change all your passwords. I didn't change my passwords and he knew all my passwords. He kicked me out of my bank. He called and reported all my credit cards lost and stolen. He kicked, and then he changed banks. You can shut down if you have I didn't know this, if you have a joint checking account and one person wants to shut down that account, they can. He shut down our bank account. He stopped all my credit cards. He destroyed my phone, so I didn't have a phone. I had no money. He took my passports. He took my kids' birth certificates. He took everything. I still, even to this day, I had to report them all as lost and stolen. So make photocopies of all your important documents. Open up a safety deposit box at a bank if you need to, just to have your passports, your financial documents that you need. Tell someone. Don't keep this in. Your friends and your family, they love you, and they will be heartbroken to know that this is happening to you, but they will be there and they will stand by you and they will do whatever it takes to make sure you are safe. That's what my friends and family told me.
That is wonderful advice. Very good. I really hope that whoever needs it is listening out there. And I mean, these are things you don't think about, like all your documentation, all your legal stuff, your passport. But if you start planning ahead of time and doing it little by little, then you are really prepared and you don't have that hanging over you.
Yes. And you have some money by having your own account, because those were things I lost all my stuff, and having no money because everything was shut down and I was locked out of everything. And even with social media, he destroyed all of that stuff as well. And then be prepared that they will use everything against you. So he texted my mugshot to all my friends and family, and he said, finally, she's been abusing me for years. finally I am free. But they all, I laugh now because it's
Oh,
just my friends and family, they know me, and, they know that he is just not a good person.
right.
But they,
But
and
it's
since
just going to another
everything,
low, right?
it is a whole different low. And everything was dropped. The prosecutor dropped everything against me.
Thank God.
Um, and even, CPS had to get involved, and even CPS said, you're the victim here. This was so wrong.
It was a
But
setup, right?
it was a setup.
So,
And
Stephany, how do you navigate the relationship or like with your ex-husbands because you have children? So you have to, I mean, I can imagine it's one thing to be like, okay, we're done. I never want to see you again. I have a restraining order, but it's another thing when you have children with the husband. It's like you have to have some sort of a relationship. How do you work with that?
yeah, you do and you don't. So our baby, I took him and left, and I moved 3,000 miles away. And he has not even tried to contact me. I have him blocked on everything. I've filed for divorce. Actually, he was very hostile, and he moved as well. And I couldn't get his address for a long time. And I had process servers attempting, calling him, trying to get the address, and he was just very, very hostile. And even my attorney was like, I think he's crazy. I'm like, you think? I've been telling you. And he actually got a third DUI last month, which in Florida, that's 3 months in jail, and you lose your license for 10 years. But on that paperwork, it had his address. Um, and so he has not tried, and in that divorce, I made it very clear that he will not have a relationship with our child. My second husband, we have for 6 years tried to only communicate about the boys, and and that's all we've done. But he has used the courts. Like I said, he agreed to us moving, and then he changed his mind. Then he agreed, and then he changed
Hmm.
his mind. It's like it's been frivolous motion after frivolous motion after frivolous motion. And if you're with a narcissist who is so adamant about their image, and my first ex-husband was very involved in the church and in the community, and he was a doctor. Um, he had a certain image,
That he
and
wanted to maintain.
he needed to maintain that. And so for him, it was just fine. And he had the more disposable income than I did. So he could constantly just file frivolous motions that they went nowhere. But, it meant I had to spend more money, and I had to do all this stuff. And in the end, when he did commit suicide, it was,
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you next. So,
yeah, it was, there was a lot of conflicting emotions there. Like, he wasn't that great of a person. And is this someone that I wanted my children to grow up to be like? No,
so did he
not
have a
really.
relationship with the kids?
So they would spend the summers with him in Oregon. And, but when his relationship with them he was very much the Disneyland dad. So he would
Mm.
have them
Fun
say,
activities.
yeah. So he would have them like 6 overnights a month. But really, it would usually come down to 4 overnights a month, because he had some important function, or he had something he needed to do. So although he could have up to 6 nights, he usually only took up to 4 nights. There was always an excuse for bringing them back early.
Right.
Um, and yeah, he would just spend a lot of money, and they would and buy them things, but they wouldn't go to him for
Like an
like
emotional support
exactly.
relationship.
It was me. And so when they would come back to me, they would just fall apart. It's like starting all over again.
Right.
And
How
so
long ago did he commit suicide?
It was actually a month ago. It was last month.
Oh my goodness. I'm
Yeah.
sorry. That's very recent. So how old are the children right now?
So my 11 and 9.
So how are you navigating that information to them? Because that's a tough
Yeah,
age.
that is. And I feel very blessed that my one of my very best friends is a marriage and family therapist. And she is usually at our house every weekend. Her and her husband come down and spend the weekend with us. And so she's given me lots of resources and stuff to help them through it. It because my three stepsons lost their mom 2 years ago. I also was working with them in therapy and learning a lot about how to work with children through the death of a parent. So I do have the experience of, helping them work through their mom stuff. And so, one of the more interesting things though is that my 9-year-old, a couple hours after I told him that his dad died, he said, "Mom, now we can go travel the world." And for a 9-year-old to say that in his words, it's we are free.
That's exactly what I was
And
gonna say.
and I it's very controversial. Some people tell their kids, some people don't. Some people try to protect their kids and stay and try to minimize as much as they can. But the truth is that our children know what is going on.
They
And if
do.
you don't
They do.
explain it to
It's
them, they
worse
are
for them.
going to formulate their own opinions.
Hmm.
And so I've always been very open with my children. Um, Even when their dad went and left
Did
for
he
another
leave a
marriage,
note or anything for the kids or any
he
type of
let he left
explanation?
nope, he left nothing for them. And it's like, really? Really? You don't just get to say, okay,
I'm done. Yeah.
you don't. You have responsibilities. And for as much as I did not like you, I needed you to help with our children, and especially like our 11-year-old.
That's
He's
heartbreaking.
turning into a young man,
Yes.
and I never wanted them to grow up without a father. But again, it's like, but did I want him to grow up with his father as
A
the
role
role
model.
model?
Yes. Yeah.
No, I didn't. Grandfathers, yes, but his own father, unfortunately, I have to say no. And because I've always been very open with my children, and even when their stepdad would say things, he was very toxic masculinity. Oh, you're just gonna go pout and go cry to your mom because you probably just need her to nurse you for a little bit. Like horrible things like that. I would sit down with my kids and say, look, do you know what he said and why he said it? And correct that behavior and tell them, like, it's not okay. It's not okay for people to treat you like this.
Yeah.
It's not okay for that. It's not okay for me. And and then even with their dad, so their dad's behavior as well, like, with all the cheating and the affairs and all this stuff, like, they I was always open and honest with them on their level.
I love that. I think that's such a good way to deal with the situation because just like you said, kids do know. They're not stupid. They know when, there's fighting going on, there's cheating going on. They pretend they're not listening, but they're picking up things and they're very smart, even at a very young age. So when we don't
Yes.
actually communicate and tell them like this is what's going on, then it causes so much more pain and damage for them. So I love how you had this open communication and a great mother-son relationship where you explained everything and actually try to fix the father's behavior so that they don't carry that with them, learn those
Oh,
bad
yeah.
behaviors.
Oh, absolutely. And with narcissism as well, there are certain generational traumas that can be passed down in our
Mhm.
DNA. And that was something when, learning about all of this and really having to to break those generational patterns.
Right.
And so, like I was saying in the beginning, I come from a very peaceful family, but I have since learned on my mother's side, every single grandfather down, 3 generations was a narcissist. And so, because it is in my DNA,
Mhm.
it is easier for me to attract that into my life.
Right.
And I've since learned all of this. And, I'm not just saying this from like a woohoo. This is actually
That's very
like
interesting.
science.
So it skipped
Is
your parents' generation, right? You're right. So it was from
yeah,
before, right? And then you later learned about that.
yeah. And so, I have 3 other sisters, and 2 of my other sisters were married to narcissists as well. And so it's like, you can see these generational patterns, and I've had to spend a lot of time like trying to break these patterns so it's not passed on to my children.
Yes,
And
that's what I
when
was going
I
to say.
do,
Yeah.
yeah, and when I do EFT, I release everything at the cellular level, from the bone marrow, from the cells, from the tiniest atom of who we are, because I don't want these patterns repeated, and I don't want my children to take on these
Yep.
traits.
Yes.
And so, doing the hard work, I've actually taught my kids how to do EFT. I've done EFT with them for
I love it.
years.
I love it. I've done EFT a few times, but like through watching a YouTube and kind of trying to teach myself, it actually works. And there's been times that I've been doing it, and my child or my husband, they walk by and they kind of look at me like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
Because if you're
So
not familiar with it, you kind of get nervous, like, is she losing her mind? Right? But it
yes.
works.
So
So I vouch
it
for
does
that.
work.
Well,
And
Stephany,
my kids know.
this has been an incredible conversation. Just to wrap it up, I mean, I just have to say, I have to admit that this episode has been quite emotional. I think we've all learned today that abuse isn't just limited to just physical harm. It can be emotional and it can be verbal. Unfortunately, some of us tend to minimize abuse when it's not physical, but any form of abuse should never be tolerated. Every healthy relationship should be built on a foundation of respect, trust, and a sense of safety. Unaddressed trauma can manifest in our bodies, leading to various aches and illnesses. So, listeners, it's essential for us to acknowledge our pain and release it so that we can heal. Our guest today, Stephany, is a remarkable and resilient woman. Her journey from victimhood to victory is a powerful source of inspiration, highlighting the unwavering belief in the human spirit's remarkable capacity for healing and personal growth. By sharing your story today, I really believe you've empowered my listeners to make intuitive choices, seize opportunities, and cultivate a purpose-driven life. Thank you so much for being here today. Is there anything else you would like to share with our listeners?
I would just leave with, we have the keys to our healing inside us. Sometimes we just need the tools like EFT, or, some other healing modality,
Mhm.
but you do have the keys within yourself to heal. And there is true freedom on the other side of leaving the abusive relationship. It might not seem like it at the moment, and it will be hard, but you can do hard things and you will get through this.
I love it. What a great way to end this episode. I will have your information, and all the notes from our show will be in all the links, actually links for suicide, women's shelter, domestic violence will all be on our show notes. Thank you so much for being
Perfect.
today. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you everyone for tuning in today to Female Fluence. Together we can influence and motivate other mind-like females. Your job is to feel alive, be in control, and always be true to your own self. Please don't forget to subscribe so you can continue feeling inspired. All the links and notes from this episode will be posted on my website, femalefluence.com. Don't forget to also follow me at Female Fluence on both Instagram and Facebook. Lastly, if you are in need of a woman empowerment life coach to help you identify the barriers that keep you from living the life you seek, please send an email to info@femalefluence.org. Remember, my friends, don't just exist, but live your life to the fullest. I'm your host, Pearl Mashur. Until we talk next time.